Hey, welcome back, beautiful and intelligent people. Welcome back to Tiny House and Off-Grid Resources, the channel where we rebuild, repair, recycle instead of replace. Now, in the video earlier this week, I was working on my new wind turbine, which I purchased, and I decided that before putting it up the pole, I was going to do a few jobs to it just to ensure its longevity and quality of service. So part of that was creating a capacitor pack. Now a capacitor pack is what I've got here. It's made by me, and I'm going to show you in a few minutes how I made it. But first of all, what I want to do is tell you a little bit about capacitors and supercapacitors and how they differ from batteries. Now, one of my subscribers left me a message asking if I could explain about supercapacitors, ELI5. Now, I had no idea what ELI5 was, so I searched it on the net. And it seems that ELI5 is explain it like I'm 5. And funnily enough, I've just been explaining supercaps to a 9-year-old girl. And I hope that I can explain them to you guys the same way I explained it to her and have it make some sense. So here goes.
But first, a disclaimer. I'm an old hippie in a tiny house, not a doctor or a dentist or an airline pilot, so take everything I say with a pinch of salt unless you're prepared to understand that for the last 10 years I've been delving into supercapacitors. Since they were first invented, I was a little bit obsessed by them, and I knew that I wanted them in my life. So, capacitors are like a battery, but not like a battery. They do the same job as a battery, they store energy, but they do it in a very different way. They use a system called dielectric plates, whereas a battery stores them in a chemical solution. And the chemical is changed by charging it. Anyway, remembering that I'm trying to explain it to you like you're a 9-year-old girl, let's see how we can manage with this. Supercapacitors act like any other kind of capacitor, only they can store huge amounts of energy. Many capacitors that you'd have seen in audio circuits have capacitances such as 470 microfarads or 680 microfarads. Capacitors used in high frequency applications can be as small as 1 picofarad. The farad's a measure of capacitance or storage capacity. They're often used to filter out noise and to even out power delivery in electric devices like telephones or stereos or RTs, radios, that kind of thing, to give better speech quality. Now you'll also get larger capacitors in an AC-DC power supply, and that takes the ripple out of the line. That will remove the fluctuations in the frequencies. Now, supercapacitors can be used in solar power applications, battery backup applications, battery applications. They can be used as high-powered flashlights. Now, aside from the fact that a supercapacitor can be charged extremely quickly due to their low internal resistance, they can also be just as quickly discharged. Batteries contain harmful chemicals. They die over time. If you handle your supercapacitors carefully, you will die before they do. Seriously. However, there are rules. Supercapacitors don't give off gas like lead-acid batteries. They can't store as much energy as a lead-acid battery either. They're a lot lighter. You can place capacitors in series or in parallel to either up the maximum charge voltage or the total capacitance. We'll talk about that later. There's a lot more that I can say about capacitors, and you're not going to want to spend your entire day listening to me, so let's get down to the big. Now, 9-year-old girl speak. A capacitor stores electricity, much the same as a water tank stores water. So imagine if you were to have a large water tank like you would have outside a rural house, and it has a small pipe that goes into the house. That battery, that water tank can deliver water into the house at a speed regulated by the diameter of the pipe. Now imagine a supercapacitor as being another water tank next to this water tank. It doesn't need to be anywhere near as big, because all it's going to do is provide large amounts of water, electricity, for a very short time, just to help the other water tank get over supply and demand issues. So this second water tank that you've just put next door has got a really large water pipe going into it and a really large water pipe going out of it. So it can fill very quickly and empty very quickly. That means that in the house, whenever you need a large amount of water in a hurry, you can have it. How it works with electricity is that your solar power system, your panels on the roof, have got the capacity to charge your batteries many times in a day if only the batteries would charge faster, and they won't. So by adding a different kind of energy storage medium next to the battery, connected to it, your solar panels can charge this small water tank, this storage device, many times over the day, incredibly fast. Your batteries will take hours to charge. Your supercapacitors will take just minutes. That means that if you're using something during the day, like a washing machine or a vacuum cleaner or the toaster or a large electric motor such as what powers my compressor, which I use many times during the day, the surge of power required to get these things up and going, the energy draw is quite large, and it's hard for your batteries to cope with that. A supercapacitor pack will take over in these situations and will deliver large amounts of power in a very short time, and then recharge again very quickly, so that next time they're needed, the power is available again. The great thing about supercapacitors is that their lifespan is literally thousands of times longer than a battery. They will do tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of cycles with no ill effects to them whatsoever. They require protection in much the same way as a battery needs protection, and the individual cells need to be balanced just the same as, for example, lithium batteries. They have a BMS board strapped to each pack. That's a battery management system. Now, even though it's not a battery, it needs the same kind of protection. So these BMS boards make sure that the power going in is not too much, although they will take a huge power dump if asked, and it will stop them from overcharging, because if you overcharge a capacitor like a battery, it will overheat and there could be a fire hazard. So the BMS protects it the same way as a BMS protects a battery. Supercaps have been around for around 10 years, as I said. The price has dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped, and now I find them really affordable. Now, remember earlier I said you've got to follow the rules? Well, the rules are that supercaps are like gremlins, or perhaps even like the Mogwai. You've got to follow certain rules or you're going to regret it. If you follow the rules, you're going to have happy capacitors that will lead extremely long lives and give you lots of bang for your buck. And the rules are: 1. You must never charge past the capacitor voltage rating. if you've got a 2.5 volt supercap, you must never charge it at a higher voltage. If you do, you risk damaging the integrity of the cap, or at worst an explosion. Now these ones that I'm going to show you are only going to be charged to around 80% of their charge. The pack is rated at 16.9 volts. I'm only taking it to 14.4 so that it matches my lithium batteries. Now 2, if you have a 12 volt capacitor bank and you're charging it with a 12 volt charge, you can leave it unsupervised and go and have a snack. It won't be a problem. You don't have to worry about capacitors developing a charging memory like batteries. When the capacitor bank's full, it'll stop accepting energy. It won't hurt the capacitors if you keep charging them all the time. Now as long as you're charging them at the correct rate that the pack or the individual supercap is rated for, you can leave them on the charger permanently and you won't do any damage to them whatsoever. Batteries, on the other hand, will turn to poop if you leave them on a charger for too long. And that's another reason why supercapacitors are so awesome. And number 3, if you're charging supercaps, you'll have to be careful, not for your own safety, but rather for the safety of the power supply. Supercaps will take in as much current as they possibly can, and it will look like a dead short on your power supply, which can cause fuses to blow. You'll have to limit the charge to the supercapacitors. Most power supplies have the facility to do that, and also most charge controllers for solar have the capacity to be programmed to do just that too. How I do it with mine is by running them through the controller and program MPPT controller to limit the charge to the same charge as the batteries. In my case, 14.4, because they're lithiums. So, just to recap, supercaps differ from ordinary capacitors by the fact that they can store huge amounts of energy but not particularly high voltages. You will find ordinary capacitors rated for 200 or 300 volts, but you'll only find supercaps rated to a maximum of about 3.2 volts. So the ones I'm using are 2.7 volts and they're grouped into cells of 6, so that gives a total of 16.2 volts. Those cells are then added together in parallel to give me 16.2 volts at a much higher amperage. I've got 5 of them, so it's the total amps of the pack times 5, which is giving me a fair old amount of power that is the equivalent to 4.5 watt hours of electricity. It's not a huge amount, but it's an amount that can be delivered rapidly again and again and again throughout the day, getting over those humps. That's what I'm trying to get through mainly. The main point that I want to make is these things won't run your home, but they will help your batteries run your home without being stressed. So if you've got appliances that you have to use that use a fair old amount of power, having some of these will protect your batteries. The more you have, the better protection you've got, but it can be a bit of overkill. So don't worry, you can add them in small packs and just add more if you feel you need it later down the track. Supercaps have been around for around 10 years, as I said. The price has dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped, and now I find them really affordable. What I'm going to do now is move into the making of my supercapacitor pack and show you which ones I used, where I bought them from, how much they cost, and how they were turned into a usable product that I can connect to my solar and wind power system. turned into a usable product purchased that I can on eBay to my solar and wind power 2.7 volts individually, ganged together in a gang of 6 to provide 16.6 volts, and they are 16 farads. So they're ganged together. I've got 10 lots of these. I've hot melt glued them into pairs so that they're easier to handle, because the height of a pair inside the cavity in the back of my solar panels that I'm going to use for this system. So once they're hot melt glued together, I'm placing them onto the stiffening board that is cut from the same material that they use for real estate sign. To insulate the boards between the packs, I'm going to use the foam that these things came wrapped in. It'll give a little bit of cushioning, and it will just insulate the terminals from the bare bums of the next row of capacitors. It will fit perfectly. So we've got 5 packs. That means I'll need 4 of these. Each pack carries a voltage of 16 volts, which is more than what I want, but that's fine. So what I'm doing now is packing the battery pack so that all of the negatives are on one side and all of the positives are on the other. And I'm going to put these packs together in parallel, which won't increase the voltage but will increase the amperage. Now I'm just throwing a bit of tape around it to hold it all together in a tidy row while I get started on the wiring. Once the wiring's in, I'll wrap the whole thing so that it's one big electric brick. I'm giving it a bit of hostage tape now to hold it firmly. A few inches of this around your wrists and nobody's going anywhere. So that'll hold it all in place, and now I'm going to make a rainproof cover for it, because this is going to live outside. After taping the battery up, you'll see how all of the cells have been aligned so that the positives are on the same side and the negatives are on the opposite side. I've selected a heavy 4mm wire as the bus bar or jumper that goes between the cells and feeds out the end. To go from each individual cell, I've used smaller 1.5mm gauge wire, and I've put hot melt glue for insulation over every soldered joint that I've made. What I'm going to do now is just wrap a little bit more of that foam over to take out the sharp edges of these boards, and I'll wrap the thing with a waterproof barrier, because this thing is going to live outside. It will be under shelter, but it might occasionally get a shower of rain on it. So what I'm using to wrap it with is something that's a little bit experimental for me. This is called Tyvap. It's the vapor barrier that they put on new houses before the siding goes on the outside. Supposedly it's waterproof but not vapor-proof. So that means that any moisture that gets inside can actually escape as vapor, but rain itself can't get through. So I've just found a damaged portion there. I'm going to cut that off because, of course, hey, I didn't buy this new. I pulled it out of a rubbish bin, as I do with a lot of things. So this is experimental. We'll give it a wrap with this vapor barrier. The reason I'm wiping it is because it's been outside in the rain. I was using it as a cover just to cover an old fireplace that was out in the garden. So I've cut a piece off the end of it, and we'll see how it goes for making a cover for this battery. I've never used this before except for just using it as a cover over stuff out in the yard, but there's a couple of things about it that I really like. One is that ordinary packaging tape, the clear stuff that you do parcels with, sticks to it like peanut butter to a blanket. It's brilliant. And the other thing is, after you've covered it and taped it all up and made a little Christmas parcel, you heat it with a heat gun and it shrinks. So it pulls really tight and actually looks rather cool. Alrighty then, almost the end of the video. Let me think of anything that I might have forgotten to tell you about supercapacitors. Some manufacturers refer to them as ultracapacitors. Don't worry about that, that's just their ego. They're the same thing. What else can I tell you? They're relatively waterproof. They're unaffected by temperature to a greater extent than batteries. They still probably don't like absolute extremes of temperature, but you will get a strong fast charge in extremely cold conditions, which you won't get with a battery, and they do hold their charge when they get hot, which a battery won't. So they're better in that regard. They cost about as much as lithium, but you've got to remember you're not building a huge battery that's going to cost a fortune. You're building a small device that's going to help your battery, so you'll only spend about $150 US on building something like I've built here. And trust me, it's going to save you money and you'll be impressed with its capabilities. So until the next video, which will be in just a few days, I'll say goodbye for now and look forward to you coming back and watching me in the next video in a few days' time. Cheery!